Hello, welcome to my channel where you can find tutorials such as this one. In this case, this tutorial is part of a full course which I will link in the description below along with a very good discount just for you. But you can also find some other tutorials on Xamarin itself, on the signing application, on other things. So please consider subscribing if you're new. If you're not, thank you so much for watching this video again or visiting my channel again. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started. So our application already has the main navigation for us to be able to add new books and list them into a table view. We have already connected to a database, a SQL database, by creating a DB file, connecting to it and creating a table. For this, we had to add a couple of references and a package. On this lecture, it's time for us to actually add new things to the database and list them into the table view. So the first thing that we have to do, of course, is to add a couple of elements into the interface so we can actually add new elements to the table. So back in the view controller, which remember that already has a class, we are going to be adding a couple of things. First, I am going to be searching for a navigation item. So I can create a title in here, which is going to be add new or just new book. And I'm also going to be adding a bar button item. This bar button item is going to have an identifier of safe. And I am going to be needing to set a name to it so I can access it from the viewcontroller.cs file. So the name is simply going to be save button. I also need a couple of text boxes or text fields as they are called in iOS, and I'm going to drag them into the interface. I am going to make them a little wider so they are almost using the entire width of the screen, and I'm also going to be setting some constraints so they are resized accordingly to the size of the screen. I'm going to drag the second text field. I'm also going to be making this larger and going to be setting the constraints necessary. Once I have added both of these elements, I am going to remove the text from them and I'm going to add a placeholder text instead. The first one is going to be the name of the book, so I'm going to just write book name. I will need to set a name also for this element so I can access it from the C# file. This is going to be name text field. And the second one, I'm also going to remove its text and I'm going to change the placeholder text to be book author. And I'm also going to be setting a name for us to be able to access this. And it's simply going to be author text field. And now that these elements already have their names, we are going to be able to access them from the C# class. Another thing that I need to do is select the default cell that is already the table view, and I'm going to change its style to be, instead of custom, subtitle. Notice that as soon as I change it, I am now able to see a title and a subtitle inside of it, which are going to be very useful when I want to display the name and the author for the books. The first thing that I'm going to do is add the code so I can save new elements into the database. For that, I will be needing the view controller, which is the file that is controlling this view, and I am going to be needing something very similar to the connection that I have in here. In fact, I am going to be copying this because I am going to be using something very similar. But first, I need to come back to the view controller, and inside of the viewDidLoad method, I am going to access the save button and create an event handler for the clicked event. I am going to create an entire new method, and I'm going to be placing it at the bottom of the screen. In this class, I'm also going to be needing a private string path to database. And the path to database is going to be conformed by the exact same thing as in here, so I can access the exact same database. So inside of the viewDidLoad method, or actually I could do this on the constructor, I am going to be doing the exact same thing I did before. And again, to be able to use the path class, all I need to do is type Alt-Enter and select the using system.io option. So it is added as a using statement at the top. And now, inside of the event handler for the clicked event of the save button, I am going to be using something very similar to this. I am going to be having the using statement that creates a connection, but instead of creating a table, I am actually going to be inserting into it. And what I want to insert is an entirely new book. So I am going to create the book right from within the insert call, but I could do it outside if that is easier for me. And I am going to be creating by passing the author to be equal to author text field.text, and by passing the name to be equal to name text field.text. And I will close the call for the method as well as the definition for this new book. And that should be it. That should insert the element into the database. The last thing that we need to do inside of this view controller is to navigate back to the table view as soon as an element is saved. So right after this using statement, I am going to add a call to the navigation controller.pop2root method, and I'm going to set animated to be true, so there is a slight animation as the navigation occurs. We could test this out already, but it would be useless because we are not able to read from the database yet. I can close this file and return to the book table view controller where I want to retrieve all of the elements. To be able to do that, I'm actually going to override the viewDidAppear method. I want to use this method instead of the viewDidLoad method because I want to reload elements every time I come back to this view controller. Just in case I added an element from the view controller, which is the one that we have just closed, and get navigated back to this one, the new elements are also being loaded. So if I use this viewDidAppear method, it not only loads or executes the first time the view controller appears, but every time it appears. So right below the call to the base method, what I want to do is something very similar to what I'm doing in here, but again, instead of creating a table, I want to read from it. To be able to do that, to read from it, all I need to do is get the table. I actually only need to delete this create, and I am now getting the table. Of course, I need to store it somewhere, so I am going to create a new variable, which is going to be query, and I'm going to be assigning it to whatever this method call returns. Now, the query already contains the list, but notice how we have a list in here. First, let's initialize that list by doing books here in the constructor equal to new list of books. And there we have it. Now, back here where we are getting the table, I actually did this wrong, didn't I? I have to change this, create, there you go. So here I am getting the table, and I don't need this in here either. Excuse me, there you go. And now from the query, I need to iterate through each of the elements so I can add it to this list of books. So what I can do is for each book in query, I am going to add it to the books variable. So books.add, and I am going to pass the book itself. And now that the books variable has the entire database or the entire table, what we have to do is reload the table view. So any new element gets loaded into the actual interface. And from here, all we have to do is use what we have already learned. we need to override the rows in section so we can establish how many rows there are going to be inside of the table. And in this case, we have to return books.count, and we also have to override the getCell method. And in here we have to create a new cell, which is going to be UI table view cell equal to tableview.dequeue reusable cell. And for this, remember that we have to set an identifier, which I forgot before. All we have to do is select the cell, come here to the identifier section, and I'm going to just set book, save the changes, and back here write the exact same thing. And the other thing that I need is the data that is going to be displayed. And for this, I can access the books in the index path.row. So I access the corresponding element inside of the list. And then the cell has a text label, which text I can set to data.name, name of the book, that is. And there is also cell dot, I believe is detailed text label dot text, and I'm going to set this to data.author. And finally, I can return the cell. And well, that should be it. Let's finally test this out. I am going to select one of the simulators, one that I actually have opened before. And so I only have to wait a couple of seconds for this to be launched in here. And so it gets installed and it gets launched. And the first time that it launches, of course, there is no data inside of the database. Let this load for a second. But we know that the first time it loads, the table is created. So we can come here to add a new element and set the book name, which I am just going to set to start with Y by Simon Sinek. Hopefully I spelled this correctly. Select save. Notice that I get redirected automatically and the table reloads itself automatically, and now I can see the element inside the table view. So the good thing about this is that, of course, since this is a SQL database, it is still there when I reload the application. So I just close the application, I'm relaunching it. It's taking a little bit longer than I expected, but as soon as it gets launched, you can see that all of the books are still there, all of the books being just this one, but still it's right there, and I can keep adding new books like this one called Greg by whoever that is, save, and it's right there. And we can see that we have a very small issue in here, that this, when it got reloaded, two items appear to be duplicated. Now, if I close this and open it again, you'll see that it is not twice inside of the database, it is only once, but we are reloading the data and adding new data into the same list. So items that were already inside of the list are added again. You can see that there are only two books. To be able to solve this, we need to change something in here whenever we reload the data. So we have this viewDidAppear. When the viewDidAppear occurs, we need to call this one more time so the list is entirely new. So I am just going to call this here in the viewDidAppear and run this one more time and try this out again, so you can see that the issue has been solved. So here it is, the application again, and as soon as I add a new book, let's just select an actual book in here. Let's go for Harry Potter, I don't know. And this is from J.K. Rowling. Save. And you can see that these are not duplicated anymore. The issue is solved. The application is working. You have already learned how to use SQLite on your iOS applications using Xamarin.